Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and to a packed Brexit special. In a week where the full extent of Britain's Brexit bourach was laid bare, we interviewed 3 senior MPs across the main parties to try and make some sense of it all. First up, we have Vauxhall Labour MP Kate Hoey. 2 weeks ago, we featured Alistair Campbell, who said it was time to bin Brexit. Now Kate replies. She says it's time just to get on with it. Then we have the chair and the vice chair of the Commons Select Committee on International Trade debating that key Brexit issue. The UK government and the European Commission haven't even started to negotiate trade. We kick off the debate with the SNP's Angus MacNeil and Tory MP Nigel Evans. And Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh will be bringing us up to date with that other great political drama, the one being played out across the Atlantic. Is for the first time impeachment of Donald J. Trump a genuine possibility? But first, your tweets and messages. Let's hear what you have to say. Mary White says, a cracking show today. The interview with Mr McCaskill with subject matter which still fascinates even to this day. Well, Mary's talking about the Lockerbie case, of course. But on the same subject, Pete Warrior says, in view of the contradictory statements both Alex Salmond and Kenny McCaskill have made about the Lockerbie case when in and out of office, I'm left baffled by their respective position. Well, my view on Lockerbie has been governed by the Scottish Criminal Case Review Commission report, first published in abridged form in 2007 and later, after years of fighting, in its full form. And Pete Warrior, if you read that report, then it tells you 2 things. First, that the forensic case that was built is hugely impressive. That's the one that leads the trail to Malta and to Libya. But the identification evidence which helped convict Mr McGrahy is at very least suspect. Not least because Mr Gauci, the key witness, was paid after the event and by the American authorities, but still paid, which is not something that we encourage in the Scottish judicial system. And Alan and Anne from Irvine, again on the same subject, says, just watch the show. Fascinating stuff indeed about Lockerbie. Can you say as to what, in your opinion, was the reason for the plane being blown up? Was it just a terrorist incident or something more sinister? Well, Alan and Anne, I think it was a terrorist incident, and I think that's probably sinister enough. Patricia Atkinson says, it's been a Sheikh report on Scotland, a brand in the world of fashion. Great show tonight from her and Alex Salmond. Yes, Patricia, I think it's great to see the Scotland, a brand concept being so successful in the fashion world. And Gold Money finally says, excellent 3rd episode. Do tell why no Quake this time. It's nice to see that moment when you hand it over. Well, Gold Money, I have to confess, we ran out of stock. Now, the Quake's back in this episode, and I'll make sure that all the guests from last week receive their cup of kindness. 2 weeks ago, former Downing Street spin doctor Alistair Campbell told us to bin Brexit. Today, Labour MP for Vauxhall, Kate Hoey, puts the opposite point of view. Kate Hoey, welcome. Let's hear you state your case.
Brexit has been redefined by so many people since the referendum that it's worth reminding ourselves just what the people voted for last year. An independent United Kingdom with control over our laws, our borders and our money. It was not a vote out of spite, hatred or fear of any other people or country, but a desire to be like most of the rest of the world, trading freely and cooperating with neighbours. Parliament voted overwhelmingly before the referendum to accept its result, and the government repeated that promise in an expensive pamphlet delivered to every home. It must go ahead to show the British people that politicians can keep their promises. It will go ahead so that we have the freedom to choose our own future, with laws being made in our Parliament and not through the anti-democratic procedures of the EU. And it will go ahead so that we get the benefits of being the independent country that we all voted for. We need to be free to improve our labour laws, workers' rights, our environment and animal welfare standards, and to invest money where we choose in our public services, for example, and not be subject to state aid rules. The greatest opportunities for trade expansion now lie beyond the European Union, though we want to continue trading freely with the other 27 countries too. Any suggestion that we renege on our commitments now would mean following the EU on its inevitable path to ever closer union. And this is precisely what the British people rejected last year. Leaving the EU will allow us to become a proud global country, internationalist in outlook, and building our links with the Commonwealth. This is the time to recognise that the interests of the country are best served by coming together to show the European Union that there is no going back. We are determined to forge ahead, being part of Europe, but not members of a club which every year has a shrinking share of the world's economic growth. Let's just get on with it.
Kate, that was very optimistic, but isn't it the case that Brexit is going off the rails?
I don't think it is. I think there's a lot of people who would like it to be going off the rail and are working to get it to go off the rails. But actually, you know, when, in terms of people having voted last year, if you talk to many of those people, and I've been up in the north again, up in the north of England, very, very few people, in fact, nobody I've met has actually changed their minds. What we are seeing, and I think it's very important to remember, there's a kind of bubble here in Westminster and in London, which of course was very, very pro-Remain. And I believe that the negotiations, you know, were always going to be difficult. They've been made even more difficult because the EU itself seems to be wanting to make things as difficult as possible. And the media and everybody who was a Remainer wants to blame the government as if it's always their fault, whereas I tend to look at being the EU for not actually wanting to move things on.
But there are some real problems. I mean, the Brexit bill is now over 40 billion and counting. The economic growth forecasts are disastrous. The Irish problem, the border problem, looks intractable. Isn't there mounting evidence that the Brexit argument is in real trouble?
Well, there are lots of problems. There are always going to be short-term difficulties. I mean, this is a long-term process. Remember, we were in the European Union. We joined it back in 1974, the common market. It took a long time to get to this stage. You know, I'm not suggesting it's going to take all those years to get things really wonderful. The border issue is a meaningless thing, can be worked out in between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. We've settled, I think, almost completely the European Union citizens in this country. And the money, you know, it's not going to be given, not a penny, until we've got a deal. If we don't get a deal, I'm not sure we'll be paying very much money, and I wouldn't want to pay any money that's not actually owed. I mean, I'm all for keeping our country's legal responsibilities, but I want to see dot and comma of exactly why they're asking us for all this money.
But it was Boris Johnson famously who said the EU could whistle for their money. Now they've been offered 40 billion and counting. Isn't that a sign of weakness in the UK negotiating
Well, we
position?
don't actually know that it's 40 billion. I personally would have been much more reluctant to give anything. As I said, I haven't seen the detail of what they're asking us for. I mean, I've always said we're going to have to pay for the pensions, presumably, of Neil Kinnock and Peter Mandelson and people like that, all those EU commissioners that we've had huge salaries, and we'll have to pay for that. But I don't see why we should be paying anything other. We certainly should not be paying a penny just to get the EU to start talking about trade. I mean, I think the people of those other European Union countries, if they were being given the right information, would find it quite shocking that their leaders, and particularly the EU Commission, who in theory are acting on behalf of the leaders, are behaving in such a negative way when it's in their interests to get as good a deal as possible with the United Kingdom. I mean, they sell us so much more than we sell to them.
Okay, we were both in Parliament in March of this year, when by a massive majority the Commons voted to invoke Article 50. You voted for, I voted against. But isn't there a sign that the parliamentary arithmetic is starting to change and that your party, the Labour Party, are edging away from that Brexit position?
Well, I think you were very principled, people like you who voted against it. There were a lot of people who voted for it, for all sorts of, with gritted teeth. But there was a huge majority, and Parliament has decided to invoke Article 50. We are leaving now in 2 years' time, in March 2019. There is no doubt about it, there's a majority in Parliament who voted to remain. So there is a shift, I think, of reality. But that doesn't mean to say that there's not still a lot of people in Parliament who would love to wreck it.
But wouldn't a single market arrangement like Norway be an acceptable compromise? I mean, what's so bad about being like Norway?
Because we voted to take back control of our borders, and the European Union had the opportunity, when Cameron was doing his fake negotiations, to actually make some real changes, and they didn't want to do that. And you know, the train has moved on. We've passed that now. We can't stay in the internal market. That was always absolutely said, even by David Cameron and George Osborne, who said very clearly, if you leave and vote to leave, you will be leaving the single market. The customs union, staying in the customs union, wouldn't allow us to have that freedom, which I think as a great country the United Kingdom has now, to reach out to the rest of the world and to really get trade going in areas that we can negotiate much more quickly than we would with 27 other countries. But that doesn't mean to say we don't want to be good friends with the EU and trade with them, and the Germans still want to sell us their cars and we want their wine and all of those kinds of things. But we have to, bottom line is, you know, I put the country first before the overall position of the European Union.
And many of your fellow Brexiteers have this vision of the UK becoming a sort of mid-Atlantic Singapore. But Singapore is a small country in a large trading area called ASEAN. The UK is a medium-sized country, and there's no trade deal has been fixed at all.
Just because a lot of us on different parties voted to leave and work together, it doesn't mean to say we accept their view of what we will look like in 20 years' time, having left the European Union. I very much don't want to see us go down the route of being completely, you know, a kind of neoliberal agenda. That's one of the reasons I was against the European Union, because I did think that it saw everything in a very global way, which we should be able to, as the United Kingdom, make our own decisions. And there's so many things that we can't really do. You know, if Jeremy Corbyn was in power at the moment, there would be, and we were in the European Union, there are so many things that are in our manifesto, whether you agree with everything that was in the manifesto or not, or think it was feasible, that we couldn't do while we're members of the European Union.
Finally, Kate, you're a London MP, a convinced Brexiteer in a Remain city, fighting your corner successfully so far. Come March 2019, do you think it's your case that will have won the day? Oh,
absolutely. I really cannot see our country reneging. You know, they'll go on about chaos, and I think Alistair Campbell went on about chaos and how it was all dreadful. It's in the interest of those who want us to stay to make things as difficult and as pessimistic as possible. I'm an optimist. The people have said, let's get on with it, let's make it work. And I think in 10 years' time, we'll look back and say, thank goodness we made that decision in June 2015.
Now, Kate, for stating your case, you get a quake, in Gaelic for a loving cup. I gave one to Alistair Campbell, who, of course, is strictly temperance. I don't think you're of the same mind, however. Well,
I'm sure that we can find some nice Irish liquid to put in that.
Oh, no, it's only Scotch in that quake.
Oh dear. Well, I just for you. Thank you very much.
Kate Hoey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up after the break, we have a special report from Tasmina, and we'll be hosting a debate between two members of the House of Commons International Trade Select Committee. They have vastly different views on the impact of Brexit on the key issue of trade. See you soon.
Saudi Arabia and the coalition that it has built has been basically destroying Yemen, killing Yemeni civilians. Now it's a common international fact that Saudis have not refrained from even killing babies and elderly in their indiscriminate bombardment of civilian areas in Yemen for the past 30 months.
Afghanistan is not a good place. It's not a good country. And چون کسی که به شهرت میرسه خیلی برش خطرناک است برای افغانستان.
قبل از اینکه در شهرت برسد دوستا در فیسبوک، دوستای مکتب، در کوچه، همسایه‌ها، حتی قوم خویش برش میگفت که تو هم شکل بروسلی است.
فامیلیم که از برادرایم به اسم عباس صدا میکنن و مردم افغانستان وقتی بیرون میرم بروسلی افغانستان صدا میکنن.
و این ابوسلی که خود به بورسلی به اصطلاح عرضه کرده و در جهان فعلا به اصطلاح مشهور است و را تایید نمیکنه. دین این مردود است، قبول نیست و اسلام رد میکنه هر آن عملی که
و همیشه تمرین کنه، چون اتفاق نمیکنه او این مسلمان است یا او نبود، اتفاق نمیکنه.
یک چیزی شده که مثلا یک نفری به شبیه بروسلی برآمده، یاد بروسلی زنده میکنه، باعث از این میشه که دوباره بروسلی در عرصه سینما برگرده یا در ورزش. بسیاری خوب است برای رشد ورزش.
Welcome back. And dramatic developments over the last week surrounding the presidency and its future, and more controversial tweets from Donald Trump himself. Tasmina Ahmed Sheikh has been examining the latest developments.
On Friday the 1st of December, Michael Flynn, President Trump's former national security advisor, pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about conversations with Russia's ambassador, and also disclosed that he is now cooperating with the special counsel's office. Mr. Flynn thus becomes the first person from President Trump's administration to admit to breaking the law in Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into alleged interference in the 2016 United States elections by the Russian Federation. According to a statement released by the FBI, Michael Flynn was in communication with the then Russian ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak. The statement goes on to explain that this was at the request of a senior Trump transition official to find out the position of foreign governments on the topic of Israel ahead of a UN Security Council resolution. Although prosecutors did not identify by name any transition officials, CNN reported that a source believes the official to be Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law and senior advisor. And in the last few days, news reports suggest that Deutsche Bank, which has worked closely with the Trump Organization for decades, has been subpoenaed by Mueller to hand over records of accounts held by Mr. Trump at the bank. It is not clear yet what all this means for Mr. Trump and his presidency. However, this represents one of the most significant steps so far and suggests that the investigation is escalating. The coming weeks will reveal more.
So Tasmina joins me now. Impeachment, it's not really going to happen to Trump, is it?
Well, of course, it's a process and not a verdict. We have to wait and see what happens, and there's lots of experts talking about it at the moment, but it's interesting times, certainly, for the United States of America.
OK, here's a test. Who was the last minister to be impeached in the UK?
Now, I think you know I know this because of my work around potentially impeaching Tony Blair, and it's
Who was it then?
Henry Dundas.
Oh, good. Viscount Melville. He ran Scotland for Pitt the Younger. But what are the actual chances of an impeachment process taking place, even if the verdict is unlikely to go against the President?
I mean, it's hard to say just now. Obviously, there's lots of talk around it, and of course, the involvement of Kushner in it as well makes it more and more difficult for the White House to deal with it. However, we don't have any control over what goes on in the States. More interestingly, from the UK perspective, I think is the strength of feeling around Donald Trump's latest retweeting of a hard right.
You wanted to ban him.
Well, yes, I'm not alone anymore, Alex. In fact, that was a couple of years ago when we first had a debate in the Commons about it, and that's because he wanted to ban Muslims like me from entering the United States of America. He still wants to do so in terms of refugees. But the strength of feeling around his attitude, where we have some level of control, i.e. who can enter our country, is upsetting people greatly.
So even now that he's the President of the United States, you still say ban him?
I don't think it's possible to ban the office of the President of the United States of America. I think the question is it appropriate that Donald Trump come to the UK on a state visit? And I think the strength of feeling in the main around the country is that would be the most inappropriate thing for him to do at this point in time.
Tasmina, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The Westminster government hasn't even got into the starting stalls to discuss post-Brexit trade arrangements with the European Union. However, in the House of Commons, the International Trade Select Committee has been hard at work. 68 witnesses have been called to over 20 evidence sessions. But has all this activity led to a united view in the committee? Here to discuss this with me are committee chair, the SNP's senior member of Parliament, Angus MacNeil, the member for Neil and committee member Nigel Evans, the member for Ribble Valley. Welcome, gentlemen. Well, Angus MacNeil, I mean, firstly, did I get the pronunciation of your constituency, Nahur correct?
You're absolutely correct, Alec, and unlike what Nigel might say, the Battle of El Alamein is not the same place at all.
Now, listen, you've had umpteen evidence sessions, a huge number of witnesses. You're chair of the committee. What's been your conclusions thus far?
Well, the UK is heading to a situation where it's going to raise trade barriers with 27 of its closest partners. Not content with doing that, there's another 40 agreements which cover 67 countries. So we'll be raising trade barriers with about 94 countries. Now, trade talks are usually about lowering barriers, country on country or whatever. Certainly not raising barriers with 94, which is about more than half the number of countries in the WTO. So it's quite a staggering undertaking the UK is endeavouring at the moment. And I'm sure there are many people who wish them well, because it's highly courageous, Minister, as they might say in a certain programme on the BBC at one time.
Well, that was a yes, Prime Minister, and I mean, highly courageous meant you were up the creek without a paddle.
Highly courageous meant, yes, you were heading over a cliff, and the transition deal has been termed as the cliff edge with a plank at the end of it. And in other words, we will reach the edge and fall if things carry on as they are. I think the transition deal, they're talking about 2 years. I think it should be somewhere between 2 and 200 years.
I have no difficulty pronouncing Ribble Valley. But you're the vice chair of this committee. You've been at the same evidence sessions, you've heard from the same witnesses, but you've got a different view from your chairman.
I am clinically optimistic about where we are going to be when we leave the European Union, and Angus is full of gloom and doom. For me, I can't wait for it to happen, and I really do believe that the United Kingdom is going to do incredibly well. On these trade talks that we're talking about, when we leave in 2019, then Liam Fox will be able to start those negotiations in earnest with a number of countries, those that we already have got trade deals with as part of the European Union. We may be able to roll over, or indeed roll over with some nuances and changes. And then for others, we can, like the United States of America, where it all broke down with the European Union, we can start to have that trade deal with Donald Trump.
But haven't you encapsulated the problem? You say that the International Trade Secretary can start doing these deals in 2019, but we all know that international trade deals take time. At best, they take years, sometimes they take decades, and sometimes, as you rightly point out, they don't work at all. So isn't there a risk of a hiatus, a gap between coming out of the single market and securing these other trade deals that Liam Fox is working on?
Well, for a number of countries, we already have trade arrangements through the European Union, so it should be relatively easy, as I said, to roll those over with nuances to establish in 67 countries those sorts of trade deals.
But let's take the United States. I mean, as you know, I've had a few run-ins with the Donald over the years. But one thing I would give him, he's no mean negotiator. If he's got the whip hand, you're going to end up on the wrong side of the deal. Don't you think that's a danger?
In 2012, I went to Mar-a-Lago and I spoke with Donald Trump.
Front of the queue for the carving knife, it could be.
Well, do you know, for the first half hour of discussions, it was all about you. It was Alex Salmond, and I was tickled that the conversation was all about Alex Salmond. But nonetheless...
I wonder why our relationship went south.
I spoke up for you. But the reality is that even despite Donald Trump saying America first, and the United Kingdom government quite clearly should be talking about Britain first, I've got a cheese producer in the Ribble Valley. Small, in a small town. It sells £6 million worth of cheese to the United States of America without a trade deal. If we're able to do that now, what are we able to do post some sort of trade deal with the United States of America? We've got to engage. With Obama, we were at the back of a queue. Now, with Donald Trump, we're at the front of the queue.
But do you see dangers, Angus MacNeil, in this relationship, in this new trade deal with America? What could be wrong with what Nigel has said?
I think there are huge huge dangers, and I think one of the things that should be borne in mind, I think it's great to be optimistic, but the danger to optimism is greater knowledge. I think it's maybe best encapsulated in a small story from the South Korea deal. South Korean deal, you need 51% or 55% of rules of origin for automotive to be exported into Korea. Now that's achievable in an EU-wide context. It's not going to be achievable in a UK context, so you can't simply cut and paste. So the optimism tends to fade the further you delve and the more you see in all these trade agreements going forward. And, you know, I wished I could be as optimistic as Nigel, but I temper it with realism, unfortunately.
But don't you have crofters and the Western Islands who are worried about having to compete with hormone-injected beef.
Absolutely, and also worrying about trade barriers going off to their main market at the moment, the European continent, as well as customs checks. One thing that's not really touched about is the actual process of doing all this. At the moment, the UK processes about 30 million customs checks a year. It's recently had a capacity increase to 100 million customs checks a year, but it's actually going to need to do about 330 million customs checks a year, which means, as we know, from Dover, lorries are processed in every 2 minutes. If in Dover alone they go from 2 minutes to 4 minutes, that equals a 17-kilometre tailback on the way to the port of Dover.
Nigel Evans, you're optimistic. Your chairman is a bit less so.
Gloomy.
He calls me Private Fraser.
Gloomy is the word you're looking for.
The contrast between your committee, well, from whatever point of view, you're charging on, interviewing witnesses, trying to establish the facts, but the government, who are actually going to do the negotiations, they're not even in the starting stalls. They haven't got past the preliminary negotiations with the European Union. Don't you see that as a difficulty?
We know that for the first 2 years on the transition, we'll still be paying in to be members of the European Union as if we were, although we will be outside. So that gives us access to the single market during that period of time. And then in 2021, that will change to whatever the new relationship happens to be. So we've got this little bit of wiggle room, which I'm quite happy with. I know Angus would like it to be 200 years, but that's not going to happen.
All this started in June 2016. By March 2017, the Prime Minister triggered Article 50. She seemed eventually to know what she was doing after those 9 months. And then 3 weeks later, she decided to have a general election, which that took till June. The government didn't get going again properly till September. By the end of September, she went to Florence and said, see, those 2 years I triggered off only 6 months ago. Could I now have a 2-year extension on that? She didn't get that. She went off to have lunch with Juncker. This doesn't seem to me to be a government that fills me with confidence that they know what they're doing from one day to the next, far less from 1 week to the next, or 1 year to the next, or 1 month to the next. This is a government that's really feeling in the dark.
Surely you admit, Nigel, that there's a great differences within the Conservative Party in terms of the direction, even among Brexiteers. I mean, it was Boris Johnson who said the EU could whistle for their money. Now it seems to be accepted that the bill is 50 billion and mounting. What do you say about the Conservative Party? Are they coherent on this issue?
Certainly more coherent than the Labour Party, that's for certain. At least we're keeping the consistent approach that we're leaving the European Union. When the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, talked about whistling in the wind, it was when they were asking for 100 billion. We certainly weren't going to be paying that sort of sums of money. What we're doing
50 billion seems quite a big whistle, Nigel.
Well, no, it's what legal obligations, and that's what Theresa May said in the Florence speech that she made, is that there's a certain sum of money for the transitional period, and then there's our legal obligations. We're not going to be paying any ransom money. I would be totally opposed to that. We're not going to be playing Santa to Brussels and Scrooge to Britain. That's not going to happen, and I'm quite content with the approach that's been taken.
A very seasonal message there.
Angus Brendan MacNeil, Chairman of the International Trade Committee. Nigel Evans, Vice Chairman of the International Trade Committee. I'm delighted to say I can unite you on one thing, and this is the special quake, which you'll be familiar with, Angus, perhaps you slightly less so. The whisky in there, not Welsh stuff, Scotch. You pass it round your close friends.
Oh, fantastic.
And then you can agree that trade statistics are not the water of life.
And is the reason we got one each
Thank
is
you
that
so
we
much.
share. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's the view of two MPs, or the chair and vice chair of a parliamentary select committee, but no meeting of minds on the complexity which Brexit poses to international trade. And as this week's shenanigans in Brussels demonstrate, we have not even reached the point of starting the vital trade negotiations. This is my view. I admire the supreme confidence of the Brexiteers, whether it be Nigel Evans or Kate Hoey, that everything will be all right in the night. But as Robert Burns said, facts are cheers at Wanading. And the fact is that the only reason Britain has neared agreement on the Brexit bill is that the UK negotiators have caved in totally to Brussels' demands. The fact is that we are near agreement on Euro citizenship only because, once again, the Brussels view has prevailed. The fact is that the Irish border has now stymied negotiations because it's the first issue where the UK negotiators have been unable to unilaterally surrender. They are stuck in no man's land between the interests of the European Commission, with whom they need agreement, and the prejudices of the democratic unionists from whom they need support. The Prime Minister is thus between a rock and some real hard cases. I've previously said the Archangel Gabriel would have found it tough to play the Brexit hand well, and David Davis is not imbued with divine powers. However, it would also take a Prime Minister with the artifice of a Harold Wilson or the mental agility of a Lloyd George to win through with any measure of success. Theresa May has neither. She is instead the most poorly equipped Prime Minister of modern times, petrified like some poor wee deer caught in the headlights of the Brexit juggernaut. The message to Tory MPs this weekend: go back to your constituencies and prepare for further Brexit humiliation. And so from Taz, the team and me, it's goodbye for now.